Okay, it's 4:01, so I'm going to call to order the December meeting of the Independent Ethics Board for the City of Tallahassee. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from November the 20th. Does anybody have any comments or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, Dr. Grant moves the approval of the minutes, and Ms. McNeil seconds. Everyone in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. Nay, and the minutes are approved. Before we go to the Ethics Officer report, a couple of announcements. We all know that this is Mr. Davis's last meeting. His replacement, if you have not seen, is Gwen Graham, who will be here for our January meeting. We also have for our January meeting a new member, Lee Bouchong, who's appointed by the public defender. He's here in the audience. He came to subject himself to an additional meeting that wasn't required of him. Mr. Bouchong, I've read your background, but if you'd like to come to the mic there, I'd love to have you just introduce yourself to the folks in the room, since we'll be seeing you on a regular basis.
Okay. Hey, it works right off the bat, so that's a good thing. Yes, folks, Lee Bouchong here, and I'm not new to Florida, but I'm fairly new to Tallahassee. So just the brief bio, the elevator pitch, if you will. Did a couple tours in Marine Corps once upon a time when I was a bit younger. Then I joined law enforcement down in Lee County, where I stayed down there about 20 years. And I made the jump into academics now. I've got a PhD in criminal justice itself, and we're actually moving in some exciting new ways here with the forensic aspect that I bring to it. And hence, that's my connection to some of our actors here in the community and my relationship with Mr. Thomas, which has brought me, obviously, this appointment. So that's me in a nutshell, okay? So the softer side of me, I got 6 kids, all right? Everybody rolls their eyes and looks at me like I'm silly, but it's true, I do. You know, and they keep me busy as well. So that's it, sir. I mean, that's nitty gritty.
Okay, that's great. I don't know that we think any the less of you. We wonder about your wife's sanity, but
I question hers too.
Okay, if you got 6 kids and you're keeping it together, congratulations. You're a good man. If you can do that, you can do this. Okay, thank you. We will have when we do the break. We're going to say goodbye to Mr. Davis. So that will be coming up. On the Ethics Officer report, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, I think there are 4 pieces of this. The first is your activity log. Anything that you want to add or expand on that? Maybe like the 5th bullet?
As we discussed, yes, right, Mr. Chair. This is a report that you all are used to seeing each month that details what I've done since the last meeting. Specifically, I did want to reference that I've had an opportunity to meet with Mayor Daley, his Chief of Staff, and Commissioner Diane Williams-Cox. I'm still waiting to meet with the other commissioner that's new. And those were great and productive discussions, orienting them to the history of the board's work, and actually the vision that the board has for its future. As we talk about today, the recommendations we have for 2019. So I also was able to give them a preview of, I guess, coming attractions. So those were great discussions. I've also been working with Ms. Amy Toman, who, yes, I'm calling her out. She's sitting right over there, the Deputy City Attorney, and we're preparing our annual ethics education that we do every year for the City Commission, their staff, and leadership. So we're excited this year to have 3 new elected officials to educate, and we're getting people like Pat Gleason, our own Simone Marstiller to come talk, so it won't just be folks from here. We're getting the best experts we can to educate our commission and leadership. So we've been working hard on that. And I just got back from the annual conference I go to. I didn't go last year because it was in Canada, but I went to my Conference of Government Ethics Laws conference in Philadelphia and brought back some great ideas, which I'll be sharing throughout the year, and some tidbits a little bit later. Ms. Toman was actually there as well. And next year, I think she's going to be president of the organization, and the conference is going to be in Chicago. So that was great.
Okay, any questions of Ms. Meadows-Keefe? Seeing none, when I was doing announcements, I skipped over the one that was painful. That probably is because it's painful. I just received a letter from Mr. Holloman that he's resigning from the board. Mr. Holloman, is that all I need to say, or should I say, or would you like to say more?
Well, I'll say I'm going to apply for the vacant city commission seat, and so therefore I'm required to resign from the board. So I haven't submitted an application yet. I wanted to be here for this last meeting, and then I'll resign. My resignation is effective tomorrow, effectively. But I've enjoyed serving with everybody. It's been my pleasure. This board is positioned to do some good things for the city. Clearly, the event that makes it possible that I can even apply is just a reinforcement of how important this board is. And so, I wish you the best going forward. And if I am fortunate enough to be appointed, then I will absolutely be a big supporter of this board.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Holloman. Very sorry to get this letter. Best of luck as you move forward. That puts us back, excuse my continuing interruptions here, in the ethics officer report. The second piece is the issue tracking. There is one issue. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized. On 152.
Yes, Mr. Chair. There was just one this month, and I've closed that pending board approval. The subject matter of that was someone believes that his friend was being gang stalked, and it had nothing to do with anything going on in the city of Tallahassee. Format-wise, I did want to point out some alterations made to this sheet. They aren't that obvious because there's just one matter on it, but the chair has indicated some thoughts about wanting to more accurately reflect what's going on each month, and I'd called it hotline tracking, but not all my issues come through the hotline. Relatively few come through that. People call my normal phone, they email me, they see me in the hall. So what this is for approval. This is not final. This was something I did on my own, but I'm describing the report as the monthly independent ethics board issue tracking report. So I feel like that's a more accurate way to describe it because it says it's the issue tracking report. So it's any issue I've gotten from any source, not just the hotline. So I feel like that is more accurate. I've got some of the same columns on there, but I did add source of inquiry. So if the call or the issue does come through the hotline, that column will say hotline, and then we can make fancy colors and stuff to highlight what we get from the hotline to make that easy to pull out. And then I have a column there whether it's an ethics matter, yes or no. And so that's just a column that'll have a Y or an N in it. So I was trying to incorporate some of the suggestions I'd received from the chair and from other board members. And going forward, I would suggest we have something like that. I understand y'all may want to tweak it, but I wanted to try to present to you an alternative to what we've had.
Okay, I think my concern was that the charter amendment calls for a hotline that isn't, the things that come in on the hotline would not necessarily be within the jurisdiction of the board, only the ethics complaints that might come in on the hotline.
That's true.
We've been treating them all like they're within board jurisdiction. And if Julie gets a call about something that she just routinely refers to city HR, that isn't really ours as an ethics complaint to deal with. So what I asked her to do is keep listing all of those, and if any board member, if she thinks it's not ethics, it's just a hotline thing, then it ought to be really her job to dispose of it. But it would be reported to the board, and if any board member sees an ethics issue that Ms. Meadows-Keefe doesn't or didn't see, then we would treat it as an ethics board issue. So they're all available to us to pursue, but the only ones we would actually formally pursue and vote on would be those that are actually ethics complaints, if that makes sense. Okay, so if you have any concerns about the chart, just get with Julie on the phone or by email, whatever. Tell her what you'd like to see, if there's additional information or additional clarity that you'd like to see, and she can make those changes. I'd also like to say that related to the agendas generally, if there's anything that, because we can't really talk outside the meetings, if there's anything that anybody wants on an agenda, call Julie and just tell her, put it on the next agenda. And unless there's some specific reason professionally that she would have for not necessarily doing that, you know, it'll just automatically go, but it's not something you need to wait and raise in a meeting or anything goes through the chair. I think all of us ought to be able to put anything we want on an agenda. So again, Julie would give us her professional advice if, for instance, the agenda is just packed with, you know, ethics complaints and we don't have time, and what you have is a minor procedural matter, maybe we delay it. But short of that, everybody on the board ought to control this agenda.
True.
So the next item on the ethics officer report is our monthly budget update. Remember last month we had some numbers that were higher on the salary and benefits lines because of closing out the county fiscal year and because of 3 pay periods in 1 month. This month they're back down to normal. Otherwise it looks pretty much on a month-to-month basis.
I just had one question. What is the line item 524080, unclassified charges? At the bottom, expenses.
It's about 6 from the bottom.
Oh, that's easy. That is the campaign contribution refund program. So that's where we put the money for that. And actually, I might need to talk about this next month, but I'll give you a preview of coming attractions. We've been talking a lot about education, and we do have this line item that says unclassified charges. And we've designated that money for the campaign contribution refund program, but it is money that we won't have spent for probably several $1,000s, probably between $2,000 and $4,000. We will be able to, with the assistance of the treasurer clerk, enable some training modalities through our system called OnBase. And if you don't work with OnBase, this will be kind of like Latin to you, but it's what the city uses to archive and to communicate and to put its policies online and make everything all nice and searchable. And it can also be hooked right into a personnel file. So there's a modality where we could have employee education. We could push out policies, and people can read and confirm that they've read said policies or viewed said educational trainings and taken a test. So we have a way to integrate all of that stuff and have it go right into an employee's file. So we're actually going to try to pool resources with some other departments to achieve that, because an ongoing challenge is getting everybody educated. We do a lot of live trainings, as you all know, but sometimes it's difficult for people that, say, work in the trash collection to come to an educational opportunity. We might miss some folks, I guess, is the bottom line. People can do it on demand. So that's coming, but I did want to let you all know about that before we really start going, to see if anyone had any questions, comments, or concerns about that.
Ms. McNeil, you good?
I'm good.
Okay. The next item on the ethics officer report, or last item, is the public records requests that have been received by the city. This is the full list. I don't think there was anything on here. Usually we have a second list, a shorter list of just those items that look like they were, you know, kind of high priority city issues. This doesn't look like it has any of those. At least none that I could see. They look pretty specific to specific types of customers or types of violations or permits. If anybody has any questions, we could follow up. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. That puts us on item 4 on the agenda. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, ethics moment, you are on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I promised that I would talk a little bit about the conference I went to, and I'm not going to spend a whole host of time on that. I'll probably incorporate it in the future when I talk to you all about various subjects. But there was like a big Watergate emphasis at this last conference. John Dean was actually there, gave a keynote and participated on a panel, and as another participant in the Watergate break-ins and that whole issue. And for someone that did not follow that because I was younger, it was educational for me to hear about all of that. So the main topics were kind of big government crises types of things in ethics. And of course, they tied that Watergate scandal into how that formed the need or the legislation to empower people like inspector generals and ethics laws and rules. So out of the crisis comes opportunities for different oversight authorities to come forward. So kind of narrowing down a little bit, the great thing about this conference is that it's 445 people usually. I think they had a record turnout, and all of them are like government ethics people. So that's like a real narrow group of folks, and so it's kind of fun to be surrounded by those people, and they come from all over the world. Literally, they come from Australia, they come from Canada. And so you learn about how different people do different things. And so today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the ethics board in Philadelphia. Okay, they've had an ethics board in Philadelphia since 1962. It's gone through various permutations. At one point was all volunteer and unfunded. So it was staffed, with volunteers and had no money. And then it continued to evolve and became more of a training entity that they became trainers and had oversight for training. And then they became independent in July of 2006, and they render advisory opinions, review conduct, things that raise appearances of impropriety. So they became fully independent in November of 2006. The interesting thing about them is they are truly a shop that does everything. So their authority is over campaign finance. They're very busy with campaign finance issues. They handle lobbying, financial disclosure, and advisory opinions. The executive director of the Philadelphia Independent Ethics Board was on a panel I was on, and the name of the panel was Working Effectively with the Press. I think I saw Jeff Schweers in here, but now he's gone. Dave Davies from NPR was also there, and it was a great panel on how you can effectively work with the press and things to watch out for. The executive director of the board was actually the first person to pay an ethics violation fine in the city of Philadelphia. And yes, he still has his job, and yes, I asked that question. How did this impact your ability to keep your job, and were people mad? And really what he did, and this is just that level of caution we ought to always have, they have a confidentiality provision in their ethics code, just like we do and just like they do in 112, that prior to finding a probable cause, everything is confidential. And usually the answer is, do you have this in your office? You go confirm or deny. In this case, the executive director said no comment. And he was actually concerned that by saying no comment, the reporter would think that this was confirmation that there was an investigation. And he actually self-reported himself to his own board, took remedial steps, disclosed to the person being investigated that this had happened. No story was written by the reporter. Basically, nothing really bad happened. But he agreed to pay a $500 fine, went public, and resolved it, and now is successfully still in the job. And actually tells the story just about being careful when talking to reporters to choose words quite carefully. So that's the ethics moment for today, and I see we have another guest that walked in while I was speaking.
I pointed out that in January we're going to have 2 new members. Is this our other new member in the? Gwen Graham is the state attorney's appointee who will be replacing Mr. Davis. I'm going to put you on the spot if you don't mind. Could you come to the microphone, just introduce yourself? We've already done this for Mr. Bouchon, but I gave him, 3 minutes notice. So
I won't use 3 minutes. I'm sure everyone's happy to hear that. Now, I just came tonight so that I could be informed on the issues that are before the Ethics Board and ready to contribute in January. Thank you.
Outstanding.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Go ahead.
One of the things I'm going to ask the executive director to do is communicate with both of you to on a copy of the city ethics code, which is short, and a copy of the portion of Chapter 112 Florida statutes, which is the state ethics code, which is longer and isn't us. It's the Florida Ethics Commission, but those issues come up regularly before us just as background, since that's the scope of our jurisdiction has been one of the ongoing issues we have faced. So just a little bit of homework for both of you, which I'm sure you'll appreciate.
I appreciate that. Anything you would like me to review in advance of our initial meeting in January, I look forward to it.
Okay.
And I'll be in contact with you, and we'll meet to chat.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And thank you for accepting. And you have Mr. Davis's. I know you have a lot of experience, and people say very positive things about you. But Mr. Davis is a hard act to follow.
Well, I look forward to continuing in your fine tradition. Thank you all so much.
Ms. Graham.
Thank you.
Okay, that puts us on what we have been calling our blue sky list, which goes specifically to the issue I was just talking about, which is the jurisdiction of this board. What I'd like to do is go through these tonight one at a time and see if we can narrow the list down. So if you have, as we go through them, if it's something you particularly like or you think is, that we are not ready to go there yet, it's not ready for prime time, it's unnecessary, it's captured within another item, say so, and what we'll do is we'll see if we can squeeze this down to about half this length so that ultimately we can make a set of recommendations to both the City Commission and to our future selves for things that we ought to do. So the first item on here is subpoena power, which we go to our investigations. Pro, con? I'm seeing people nodding. Pro. Okay.
Mr. May I
Please,
just,
yes, please.
Because I think at the last meeting, you all asked me
Yes.
to just give an opinion on whether the subpoena power exists, and if not, where it would derive. And I've taken a look at it, and there actually was, or is, I should say, a longstanding Attorney General's opinion. Obviously, it doesn't speak specifically to an ethics board, but it does speak to the authority of municipalities granting subpoena power to a board that it has created. In this particular case, it was a community relations board. And the long and the short of that opinion is that under its home rule power, the municipality does have the authority to convey subpoena or authority to the board for investigative type functions, which is exactly what this board does. Question came up if perhaps there is some existing statute under which this board might find subpoena authority, that specifically it was section 162.08. But in looking at that whole chapter, which speaks to local and code enforcement boards, so things like building inspections and things like that, in my opinion, that's not where this board would find its authority. So I do believe, based on the AG's opinion, which is AGO 75-11, that the city commission does have the authority to grant subpoena power to this board.
Okay. Okay.
So
Ms. Tolman.
We talked about that being a charter amendment, correct? Is that right?
This would be, well, I think it says on here charter recommendations. I don't know that this takes a charter amendment. I think it could be could it be by ordinance? Or would it have to
What
be
it says.
I think it could be by ordinance.
And would that, so we have via that AG opinion, there's authority that says we would have the ability to issue subpoenas. Does that also get us into circuit court to enforce them if necessary?
Administrative subpoenas have to be enforced in circuit court, yes. And there is the statute that relates to the State Commission on Ethics would be a great guide to look at. But yes, in order to enforce any subpoena that this board might issue, a circuit court would have to do that, would have to order the party to comply. The party would then have to disobey that order, and then enforcement would occur.
Any other questions? So it sounds like that item stays on the list. I personally would be interested in making that, pretty narrow in a decision clearly of the board, rather than us handing it off to an investigator or somebody who might be dealing with the case, so that we're sure that we want to go forward with exercising that kind of authority, at least until we see we haven't had a case yet where we have specifically needed it. So till we see what it looks like on the ground, I think we would want to be a little careful with that. The next one is the public service announcements, prohibiting elected officials from engaging in public service announcements. Pro, con, this seemed to me less important than many of the others.
Yeah, if I could get some explanation, because I look at this and I just think of a scenario where, you have a city official, let's just say it's a mayor, and there's some sort of public emergency, hurricane, storm, fire, whatever, flood, and he or she wants to get their image out there to talk, to say, hey, look, you need to take appropriate actions to be safe, that sort of thing, and it just so happens that it's in the middle of a re-election campaign. I think that is a bridge too far, in my humble opinion.
Okay.
I'd agree with Dr. Grant.
Okay, that one comes off. The next one is offers to influence. This is by elected and appointed officials, so a small number of people, that they would be required to report any offer that was made to them with the apparent intent, and I think we might have put a reasonable person standard in here, with the apparent intent to influence their official action. So obviously this would be a situation where they didn't take the offer, but it was made. This one we like, or I'm seeing a couple of nods.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, that one would stay in. The next one is on voting, require members to vote, and if they're not present, to file a form indicating how they would have voted. I don't know that this rises as much to the level of ethics as it is a matter of how they conduct their business.
I agree with that. I saw this and I said, well, it doesn't sound like it's an ethics issue, but I mean, it goes to the procedures of, the way the city runs, its business in terms of government.
Right.
My opinion.
And so it sounds like this could come off. The next one is doing business with, and I would relate that to, on the next page, there's one that says conflicting employment or contractual relationship. I think those two, while they're separate in Chapter 112, at looks to me like there's about an 80 or 90% overlap, so somewhere, I think probably one or the other of those could come out. If we went with one, the other one could come out. Because they both look like they limit the elected and appointed officials. Now, the conflicting employment applies to all employees. And doing business with is the elected officials. Because most of the things that would be involved in doing business with, I think, would also be a conflicting contractual relationship. If you're leasing property or engaged in any kind of business transaction, that's probably going to be also a contractual relationship that would be prohibited. So I was wondering if we could go with conflicting employment, which is everybody, and not the doing business with, which is just the elected officials, and basically land in the same category of prohibited activities. Ms. Meadowskeef.
Do you want to try to blend the two together? That might be better if maybe Ms. Marstiller and I could work on something that could.
If there's something that's in doing business with that's not in conflicting contractual relationships?
I think there may be some stuff we're missing in one or the other that we could effectively put into one.
Okay, would you guys be okay with that? I'm seeing heads nodding.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so we'll take out doing business with and keep conflicting employment, which is kind of jumping ahead to page 3, with whatever is needed to cap, if there is anything that's not. And one of the important things, I think, under doing business with is that it allows certain pre-existing relationships to continue. So if my spouse was renting property to some subdivision, subset or city office before I was in elected office, that my spouse could continue to do that without creating a conflict because it was already existing. What they couldn't do would be to expand that contract or dramatically increase the rent or do something that happened after I took office. So those kinds of exceptions are already in the statute. Form 6 is, I think, already going to go into place, so it's probably not something we need to recommend.
Wasn't that an open question, though, the last time that?
Yeah, I think it's not in the constitutional amendment, but I think the legislature worked on a bill last session, and they've got it. It appears that it's going to be filed again this session, so I think they're going to get ahead of us on that one.
Mr. Chairman, can we go back to the conflicting employment? I just had
Sure.
one question I wanted clarification on. This is pretty broad, and it basically says that if you're regulated at all, if you're a city employee or appointed official and you're regulated in your private business in any way, that's a prohibited circumstance, I think. But I mean, I'm thinking about, I know for years I've paid a occupational tax or something as in my business, and would I be regulated by would I fall under that as a regulation? Or from a restaurant and I have some kind of inspection that's done?
Yeah, I think that needs to be carefully narrowed to exclude those things. Likewise, if I'm a licensed electrical, I work, say, for the city auditor, and I have long-standing electrical contracting business that I run on the side that has nothing to do with auditing. As long as I'm not doing anything that conflicts with my job, I would not want to see us interfere with people's livelihoods. Yeah. So I think you're right. I think it needs to be carefully narrowed to capture those things that would create the appearance of a conflict.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Chair, does Mr. Holloman, does the last sentence in that proposed provision address somewhat your concern?
It's My concern's broader than that. I mean, and I don't, again, this would depend upon the business, the types of businesses that the city has any regulatory authority over, and because my profession is one that's an occupation that's regulated otherwise. But if I was doing any business at all, and I'm subject to the city's, the regulatory scheme they have, then I'm afraid it might not capture that. I think the chairman's correct, though, that we have to be very careful that the unintended consequences don't usurp what we're trying to do.
Because we all do business with the city. We're all city utility customers, pay a variety of taxes that are city-related. So we all have kind of one foot in the city's business, so to speak, as just residents. But a lot of people have additional income opportunities other than their public employment, or their spouse does, which puts it right in their family. An old friend of mine who worked for the governor for a lot of years had a spouse who ran a local restaurant or owned a local restaurant. And I think we want to be careful about not capturing those kinds of things. Again, it ought to be, and maybe all of this ought to be subject to some kind of a reasonably prudent person view of the appearance of a conflict. Compensation is on here twice. It's on the third from the bottom bullet on page 2, and then again it's on the second bullet on page 3. That would limit commission members from giving themselves compensation with retroactive application. That well, comments? We like it, we don't like it?
So in the normal course of things, the commission would vote on a budget for next year, and that budget might contain some kind of cost of living or other pay increases for employees, and that would not be covered by this. But if during the course of that budget year, if there was some particular employee who there was some adjustment made that was retroactive, would that be prohibited by this or captured by this? I mean,
well, this goes to commission members. This goes to the elected officials.
Well, or commission staff. Okay, so it only goes to the commission and the commission staff. Yeah.
And I think on the next page, it only says, this got on here twice somehow. The next page, it only includes the elected officials, not even their staffs.
Yeah, as long as, my only concern would be if it's applying to the rank and file, that could cause some concerns. But if it's just to the commissioners, no, that's not.
Well, let's go with the one on page 3. We'll delete the one on page 2 and keep the one on page 3, just for elected officials. Say any benefits you give yourself needs to be prospective, basically.
Yep, I agree with that. I don't like the fact that they can't increase the budget for the rank and file city workers without, I agree with strongly.
Yeah, and certainly I agree. A regular employee may have been acting in their boss leaves, they act in that position, and they assume all kinds of additional job duties, maybe go from a covered employee for wage and hour purposes to a non-covered employee, and they stay in it for a year, and the search says we're going to put you in and we're going to give you some pay for half of that year because you've been doing the job. That kind of retroactivity I don't think bothers anybody. It certainly doesn't bother me. The next is solicitation or acceptance of gifts. It seems to me that at the bottom of page 3, we talk about expanding the misuse provision that we already have. Mm-hmm. I think solicitation and acceptance of gifts falls pretty clearly under misuse. I'm not sure we need it as a separate item.
And then we also had something right above that. It just said
On
gifts, and it said 0 gifts.
Yeah, I kind of skipped over that.
Oh, you skipped over that?
Sorry. Didn't mean to do that. So could we include the solicitation or acceptance of gifts kind of within the misuse on the following page? Because I think soliciting a gift from a city vendor is pretty clearly misuse of my position. And then
Mr. Chair, my suggestion would be, for clarity, to have a separate provision on gifts.
Okay, separate from misuse.
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying that you think we could write it in a way that, because I'm not interested in capturing somebody for 2 ethics violations for 1 action.
Understood.
Okay.
And based on that, all the more reason to have a separate solicitation of gifts or a gift ban that is separate from misuse
Okay.
of office.
Okay. Then what about the one right above that says gifts, to revise the current gift ordinance so that you cannot accept, this is not soliciting, but accept a gift from someone doing business or seeking to do business with the city, or for a lobbyist of that entity?
Well, I mean, I think we can, Ms. Meadows-Keefe and I can work on combining those two.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Gifts and solicitation. and
Board
make-
members
and make
on
them work.
gifts?
I agree. I think it needs to be separate, though, so it's clear.
Okay. Okay. That stays in. Disclosure or use of city information, this would apply to both elected officials and employees and appointed officials, that you cannot use information that is not available to the public and that you gained by reason of your public employment in order to achieve personal gain for you or your family, either while you're in office or even after you leave. So if I have a job with the city and I know the city's getting ready to purchase some property and nobody else outside the city knows that, and I leave employment, I can't go buy that property on the cheap with the intent of reselling it to the city for a lot of money without violating this provision. I think we've seen this around the state and local government. It typically has been, the issues that have come before the State Ethics Commission have involved typically the purchase and sale of real estate. Okay, I'm seeing nods, so that one would stay in.
Yes.
Compensation, this is the pay thing. So this we've already talked about. Conflicting and contractual employment, we've talked about. Misuse, this has come up a number of times. We'd like to revise. This suggests revising the current city ordinance on misuse of position to apply to everybody with the city, not just the elected officials, and to replace the corrupt intent language, which means basically crawling into someone's head to decide what they intended, with replace that with knowing and intentional.
Yes, and I would just add to that, if I were going to reorder these, I would put that one first.
Agreed. This is probably.
I think that was the big one, I mean, as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. Okay. You remember when we discussed this, a couple of you will remember when we discussed this a couple of years ago. Before it went in, we looked at the State Ethics Commission and found that the number one category of complaints that they received involved misuse of position. So this is the
Oh, and if I'm not mistaken, isn't the one we recommended that it be knowing and intentional,
right,
and it was changed by someone else
right,
to the other one? Okay. Good.
Yeah, both those phrases are used in the statutes. The ethics statute actually says corrupt intent, whereas the criminal statute, Chapter 836, on misuse of public position uses the lower standard of knowing and intentional. So it's easier to commit a crime than it is to commit an ethics violation, which seems upside down. The next one, all employees. It seems to me that this belongs in each one of the provisions. So each one of these provisions may be tailored either to elected or to all employees, and we probably ought not to just do this as a blanket thing. That each one of these provisions ought to specifically say whether it's the commission or the elected and appointed officials, or elected and appointed and management employees, or elected, appointed, and all employees, that each one of them deserves that level of care and thought as we get to drafting. Lobbying, we've got the new 6-year lobbying ban, right, takes effect December 31st, 2022 in the Constitution, so I'm not sure we need this unless someone's hot to get us in the lobbying business. Okay, that one can come out. Nepotism, this just requires disclosure, periodic disclosure of city elected and appointed officials, as well as staff who make procurement and hiring decisions, requires them to we would ask the city to require them to periodically disclose anybody who works for the city who is in the list of 27 different types of relatives who are listed in the state statute on nepotism. Doesn't say you can't do it or they can't work somewhere else in the city, but just puts people on record. Little sunshine there. And now, is this one that they could do by policy, or would this need to be? I would think they could do this as a policy rather than an ordinance.
Most likely, they could do it by
Okay.
policy.
That's something we probably ought to come back and look on all of these if it makes sense to do it by policy. This is not something that would need to come before us, I don't think, as an ethics violation, but it would be sunshine on ethics topics generally. Outsourcing. This says if city outsources a function that in the process of outsourcing, contracting, that the people who are doing that service would be subject to the same ethics rules as were their prior city employees who were doing that function. Ms. Marsteller, this give you any pause?
I'm just curious to know whether city contracts with vendors of this type already contain some sort of provision that might cover this. I don't know the answer to that question. And
Maybe we make this as a policy recommendation rather than an ordinance recommendation, say the city should consider when they outsource whether the outsourced, whether the people with whom the service is outsourced ought to be subject, make it a consideration of their outsourcing.
because I'm fairly certain that those contracts contain provisions requiring the vendors to comply with public records laws and, all those other things. Ethics code is a little bit different, but there may be already some provision there. But I think as a policy recommendation, it's a good one.
Okay. If we go that way, looks like people are good. Burden of proof.
But, just one
I'm
question
sorry,
on the
Ms. Tolliver.
outsourcing, I'm sorry. Do we know, does this occur now with the city? Is the trash pickup considered like an outsource?
Well, this would be only prospective.
But I understand, but I'm just trying to get a sense of what are the range of possibilities here. So is like the contract with whoever picks up the recycling and the trash, is that considered an outsource, or is that, do we know? Or is that going to be part of how we define this?
I think the way this was written, it was something that was currently provided by the city with city resources and staff. And then you decide to get rid of the city resources and the city staff and have it done by a private entity. So it would not apply if the city wanted to do something new and contracted it out from day one. The way this is written, it wouldn't apply to that.
Okay. So like if the electric utility was sold, that would be, or that would fall under your...
Well, if it was sold, if it was completely privatized, then no, it wouldn't apply because it wouldn't be the city's responsibility anymore. If they decided they wanted to have an outside auditor, get rid of the city auditor, just to pick on somebody who's in the audience, and decided to outsource that. It's a city function, it's been ongoing, they decided to outsource it, that the people doing that work would still be subject to the city ethics rules. Okay. Burden of proof.
Mr. Chairman, this one I have a question about, primarily because, a lot of these ideas were developed before I came on board as board counsel. As I read this, I'm not sure whether it is a recommendation to specify preponderance of the evidence as a burden of proof at the probable cause stage or at DOA.
Well, it's currently in the ordinance, I think at both stages. as clear and convincing. So if we go into a non-public meeting and do our thing, our final result, if we found an ethics violation, would need to be currently by clear and convincing, and then it would go to DOA. This has been an issue, I know, for the state ethics commission. They have the clear and convincing standard in Chapter 112, and they've recommended on several occasions to the legislature that it be changed to preponderance of the evidence, which it was back at some point historically for them.
So just so that I'm clear, the preponderance of evidence standard would apply to this board's probable cause determinations. Is that correct? Is that how we read this?
That's what we'd be proposing.
Okay, yes. Okay. I was just concerned that it read as if the board were recommending a change to the standard at the, evidentiary hearing level, because that's got to remain clear and convincing.
Yeah, I think we'd need to take those last two sentences related to DOA off and just go with the first part.
Make it clear. Got it.
Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I remembered that we studied this several years ago, and I thought there was some Florida case law that we looked at, and our board attorney may know this best, but I thought there was some case law that said that because of the nature of an ethics charge and the potential sanction as being penal in nature, that it required a burden of proof of clear and convincing. Now, I appreciate this recommendation, but is there any case law limitation that would require clear and convincing burden of proof?
That's really why I have asked the question about what we're talking about here. The clear and convincing standard, according to case law, comes into play when there is evidence produced, say, in a final hearing, so in the actual prosecution of the case. So the state agency or the municipal administrative agency is putting on its evidence to prove a violation. Its burden of proof at that stage is clear and convincing evidence. Probable cause that's preliminary. That is at a time when this board is determining whether there's enough evidence to conclude that a violation probably likely occurred. So those two standards, when we're talking about burden of proof, that term of art applies to the DOA hearing, the final hearing, the actual prosecution of the violation. Once the board has determined that there is probable cause and now we're going to pursue it, at that point, the burden of proof becomes clear and convincing because of the penal nature of the proceeding.
Let's then flag this one.
Okay.
Put a question mark next to it. Do some more work. So far, I don't think this has been a problem for us. It could be at some point. If it didn't change, it wouldn't be the end of the world, certainly. Then going into the group of things that we had for recommendations for that were. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Wilcox. I did not look up. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I just wanted to clarify, did I hear you to say that you're dropping the whole lobbying proposal because there's a second part of it that talks about penalties for not registering?
Oh, that's a good point. You want to talk to us about that?
Well, I think that should be a part of your recommendations, and I also have a question about who's enforcing the requirement that people register to lobby, because if you look at the FBI indictments, it appears that a city official was doing lobbying and being paid on a monthly basis to essentially lobby, but I don't think she ever registered to lobby. So who is looking at that sort of thing?
Okay. Well, let's go back to lobbying. Forgetting for the first part forgetting for the moment that first sentence. Mr. Wilcox is raising the second sentence about violations for failing to register as a lobbyist who is advocating before the city commission. So I think a lobbyist is defined as somebody who represents somebody else for pay to advocate their position. So obviously, if you're a school teacher, you can lobby the legislature for better funding of public schools because you're not being paid for that. You're coming up on your own time. But if you're the lobbyist for the XYZ school district and you're being paid a salary, then you have to register.
Right now, the city does have a lobbyist registration process that's managed by the treasurer clerk. And as part of my duties, I do get an updated list of those folks that have registered and for whom they lobby. I've also had people call me and ask me, do I need to register to lobby? And then I take them through kind of an evaluative process and help them decide. The challenge would be detecting those people that are exercising influence without benefit of the registration process. So the mechanics of how you discover that someone's effectively lobbying, there would just be some challenges to me in trying to figure out how to enforce that. If there could be some kind of reporting structure, if someone feels like that's happening, somehow that could get investigated, but it would just need to be fleshed out a bit, in my opinion.
Well, if we make it an ethics thing, then it would be like most of these others. Somebody would file a complaint about a violation. I mean, we're not in the business of monitoring everybody's daily activities to ferret these things out. It's not an investigative board. It's more of a quasi-judicial board.
So if there was what you're saying is that this could be something that a member of the public or an individual could complain about and say, I think that Corporation X is lobbying Commissioner Y and hasn't registered.
Board members?
So did we answer the question about currently, is there any kind of enforcement mechanism that's in place for people that don't register to lobby? You know? City Attorney? No? Is there any mechanism in place currently whereby somebody who is lobbying but doesn't register, whether there's any kind of enforcement mechanism in place to deal with that issue? So are we looking to, is this suggestion then would give this board that jurisdiction?
Well, I guess what we'd be looking at is I don't know that we need fines. I think if we said it's a violation of the city ethics code, well, but how would a lobbyist come before that's a private citizen coming before this board? So I don't know how we deal with that exactly.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just say there's some history on this recommendation that I just wanted to share. You'll recall when we were doing our recommendations that the current mayor had some ethics recommendations, and this was one that came from the previous mayor. So that's how that got in there. So if people are wondering why it's there, that's how it got there. And it wasn't clear on who would be the enforcement entity for the city's official lobbyist registry, because I don't register the lobbyists. That goes to the treasurer clerk's office.
I mean, the city could enforce it by preventing you from registering, which would mean you couldn't lobby. But I don't know if they...
But you didn't, you were already lobbying without registering anyway.
Right. Yes, ma'am, you're recognized.
I'm Marilyn Wills. Just a little history. The county commission did put in lobby regulations because we worked on that with them. And then the city asked us to do that with them, and we did it. When we were on the ethics panel, the ethics panel made recommendations which the city commission did adopt about lobbying and what happened if you didn't register. There were fines that were supposed to be imposed on people who lobbied for companies but didn't register. I mean, people who were volunteer lobbyists don't have to do that,
right.
But the people who were representing companies were supposed to be registering and were supposed to be fined for the first, second, third violation. I mean, my recommendation was that they never be allowed to lobby again, but they didn't adopt that. But they did have a fine for the first 3 violations.
But the fine would be a fine by the city, right?
Yes.
Well, let's ask staff if they'll work on this one a little bit, particularly on the second part, as a recommendation from us. I'm not sure it's within the jurisdiction of the board, because I'm not sure quite how we reach out to, you know, a private citizen who gets paid by somebody to get the city to purchase their property or buy their product or whatever. That one troubles me a little bit. But I'm sure we'll get back a sage answer. On the procedure recommendations, that comment period was mine. I would withdraw that. I think we're just stepping in their business. Organizational values, asking the city to make ethics and organizational value. I think that came from Ms. Meadows-Keefe. That seems like a fairly easy thing to do. Gifts, we've already covered. That's a duplicate at the top of page 5. Contracts voidable if they were influenced by or attempted to be influenced by a gift, and I'm assuming that's a gift from the entity that was awarded the contract, not a gift from a loser. Because then it doesn't seem like you want to avoid the winner's contract. That would be a policy recommendation to the city that they consider putting something in their contracts. People don't like that. I'm seeing nods. Yeah. Mr. Holloman, I see a shrug. Okay, I guess that one stays in with a shrug. The space thing, I think, is something we just need to work. I don't know that it's a recommendation we need to make. I think it's something we can just work with the city on. The other 3 items, listen, mail, and link, are all things that would be recommendations to ourselves to improve our visibility. Unless anyone objects to any of those. On employee and awareness, these look to me to all be things that we can just work with the city on. I don't know that we need to make specific recommendations to ourselves to do these things. I know Ms. Meadows-Keefe has these discussions on a regular basis, and I've had individual meetings with a few times with folks to kind of promote them, including our materials or our issues.
I would just reemphasize the importance of the last one here, the link. Just today, I was, whenever I need to do something that's ethics board related, I always put in the search term, City Tallahassee Ethics Board, and I get to where I need to go. But today I went to talgov.com and tried to find how you get to the ethics board information, and it's nearly impossible.
Down at the bottom of the homepage.
Yeah, it's down there in the fine print. I mean, you can find it, but that's, to me, is like there should be something a little bit more front and center that you know, links to this board, links to Julie, the hotline, everything.
Okay.
So that's I appreciate this link reference.
Okay. Well, we will emphasize that one. On page 6, additional targeting, additional technology, those are recommendations to ourselves. Falls mostly on Ms. Meadows-Keefe in terms of training activities. Budget recommendations, I'm not sure that we want to do any of these personally. I mean, we've had some meetings we didn't broadcast, and that's fine to make on a, you know, I mean, we just may have made those decisions when they were needed. Meeting less frequently has been raised by a few people. I'm thinking the advocates would be unhappy with us. Ms. McNeil? Okay. Seeing nods out there. Yeah.
Is there a budget issue with broadcasting?
It costs us money.
It costs money each time we do it, and I think let me take a look for this month. I think it's about $750
per meeting?
Per time we do it, because they got to produce it and air it.
And there are people sitting back there right now being entertained by us, so they need to be paid for that.
That seems to be the pittance for the possible value of having the public have the opportunity to see what's going on at the ethics board without, you know, from the comfort of their home.
I don't know what the viewership is, so I haven't had Nielsen rate it. I know sometimes if you're really tired at night and you're flipping through, you might see yourself on TV, and I've had that comment, I saw you, and then, of course, they flipped right to Home Shopping Network after. But
Comment on this issue, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Stanley Sims. I'm at 1320 Avondale Way. The voters of this community made it very clear that we wanted this commission of ethics and to deprive the voters of visibility of what they asked for less than $1,000 when we've got, and don't quote me on these numbers, but over 100,000 citizens in here, in this community. And not only are you not broadcasting it so that this community, at this calamity of what we're going through, should have a clear understanding of your purpose. Because then it avoids my good friend, Ms. Simone, having to explain to me, despite my personal feelings and my personal tragedy, she, in a very professional way, explained to me, I sympathize with your situation, but we don't have that power. And to deny an opportunity of communication, because you're not even on Facebook now. It's not. I have you tagged on the app that it'll, as soon as you come on television, it alerts me on my phone. And it didn't happen today. And I was wondering what was going on with that. And so, yeah, this is all new. And so, especially now, this is not the time that we start. I have to be careful because I don't have a tie on tonight. This is not a time where we look for justifications not to be transparent. We need to, I think $750 is a worthy investment to this community at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sims. I think we got universal agreement from the board here that we're not going to do these items. That would move us on to transparency recommendation, a public database of city contractors and vendors. I personally like a database of employee salaries. I personally don't like. We've been told many times that, we ought to be relying on employees to tell us what's going on, and this is the kind of thing that seems to me to pick a fight with the people who are our best source of information. A database, where it says a database of employee salaries at the end. Could we take that off? Anybody object to taking that part off?
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought you were talking about the other stuff.
Keep on there a database of who the city contractors and vendors are. That seems like just basic transparency.
I will point out, though, that the state, you can look up and see what they make. So I think that was the basis for the recommendation. So.
Yeah, but doesn't necessarily need to be coming from us.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis.
Are we through that item? Are we through that database item?
On employee salaries, yes.
Can I mention one thing?
Sure.
Okay. And I dropped the ball. I should have mentioned this under the earlier category of public awareness and engagement recommendation. Mm-hmm. But we've talked about this over the last years, and we talked about the idea of publishing something to the public on a periodic basis to say, here are some of the things we're doing. We haven't forgotten that we do this work for you, and to let them know that. And I know we did that once, and the Democrat published a nice article that Julie drafted. But this is one of my final opportunities to say this.
Okay.
That I really feel that's a way to say to the public, we're here, we remember why we're here, and it's for you.
Okay, we'll emphasize that on that middle item on page 5. That probably needs to be like an annual
Yeah, like
outreach
we're
thing. that
reporting
we've-
to the commission, and then we report to the
that
public.
we find ways to remind the public that we're a resource. Okay. Ethical hiring, this would be a city policy recommendation to ask city, the human resources to, I think, not necessarily one ethics question, but basically to talk about ethics in the hiring and for all employees, including the leadership team, to just make ethics a part of their interview process. Can we make that more generic? Ms. Tolman?
I agree, and I'm not ever a big fan of the, here's a situation, how would you solve it? I'd rather ask the question of, tell me about a time you had an ethical dilemma and how you solved it.
Yeah. Just include the topic in the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We could probably combine those two. Campaign contribution refund, we've talked about this before, sending out, this is a recommendation to us to do a better job of talking with, or a thorough job of talking with candidates, and then to do some outreach on the program. Any objections to continuing that? That would be a formal recommendation to ourselves to do better. And that would bring us to the end. What we will do at the next meeting is we'll clean this up, and I will ask our staff if they will think about some of the issues we raised, and maybe on some of these, if possible, put pen to paper and do a little bit of drafting so we could see specifically what they look like. There were a few of them that members raised specific concerns about not going too broad, being very specific, not capturing behavior that is not some, it doesn't need to be prohibited.
So, Mr. Chair, ultimately, for the recommendations that you all are making to, whether it's charter amendments or new ordinances or whatever it is, would you like for Ms. Meadows-Keefe and I to work on actual language that the board would then propose?
I think for ordinances, yes. In the past, if that's okay with the members. In the past, we got we got confused because we had things and not everybody knew exactly what they meant. On the others, if it's just a policy recommendation to the city, I think we can make those more broadly. But on ordinance-specific language, I think we ought to, and our new members ought to be able to see specifically what it is we're looking at so that we can fly spec it, make sure that we're not capturing behavior that we didn't intend to capture.
Okay. And then it makes it easier to work with the city as well when we can say this is the language that we'd
Right.
like, and then you can have that dialogue.
Is that okay, Mr. Davis?
Going back to our August meeting, when we had these blue sky recommendations on a list, there was one on that list that's not on the list now, and it dealt with misuse of public position because of bias.
Oh,
and
It's still on there.
I don't.
Did I skip it?
Did I miss it?
It's on there. It says include actions taken because of bias.
Where's that?
Well,
Oh,
it's
it's
misuse.
Bottom of page 3.
Bottom of page 3, after you talk about it, there it says include actions taken because of bias.
Okay,
So
I appreciate it.
I had not forgotten you, Mr. Davis.
I appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I skipped over that. I read it and didn't say anything. That brings us to the conclusion of that. We have a quick item on revision of bylaws. This is Article 3, Section A. This just changes Chief Judge to Public Defender. We looked at it at the last meeting as a review. This will be our final vote on it. Any discussion on this, which I think we discussed last month? Ms. Smith moves the revision of the bylaws. Ms. McNeil seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Our new member is legal now.
And now our new members, and now you're in our bylaws. Oh, lucky you. And with that, we are going to take a break for about 15 minutes.
Do we want to do a group photo?
Oh, well,
Since we
actually,
have
before we
Mr.
do
Lutz
this,
here.
Mr. Wilcox, you wanted to say something about Mr. Davis. You want to do that before we take our break? See if we can embarrass Mr. Davis a couple times during the meeting.
I just wanted to thank Mr. Davis for his service on the board. You've been there since the beginning, and you're a big reason for why this board is as effective as it is today and what you've been able to achieve. And in short, you've been a great board member, and on behalf of Citizens for Ethics Reform, we thank you and wish you the best in the future. And then finally, I would share the same thoughts with Mr. Holloman, since we just learned that he'll be leaving the board as well. You've been a great board member, and we thank you for your service.
All right, we are in about a 15-minute recess.
Well, we got to do a photograph first.
Yes,
Mr.
so
Lutz
don't leave the
can
room.
go.
He's been very patient.
That'll be about it. And then I have to go to California for
Oh, wait.
somewhat for work.
California.
Did Ms. McNeil leave?
She might have had to go.
Oh, yeah.
She might have had to go.
Okay.
We'll be out there providing, I guess, oversight.
Okay, good deal. Who's playing the Roosevelt?
Go ahead.
I'm not sure who's in it.
Okay, we are back in.
Might be in it.
A slightly longer than 15-minute break, but for me, that was about as accurate on time as I ever get. We are on item 8 on our discussion. This is, I think we had one other shortened version of Ms. Meadows-Keefe's evaluation. You remember the original one that we've used the last couple of years was long and, if I can say, painful to fill out in detail because it was about 8 or 9 pages. This one goes to the other extreme. So take a look at this. If you have comments on it.
Then I also included yours.
Get-
Everyone got one of yours as well,
Okay.
this one that you prepared.
And there's
So-
a one-pager that's got about, I don't know, instead of 6 items, it's probably got 15.
It's front and back, like a page and a half.
Yeah. So take a look at those, and somewhere in between, before we do her next evaluation, we've got plenty of time on that. But we will come up with a shorter form that is less painful to fill out.
This is definitely going in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Holloman.
Shorter is better, I agree.
All right. Well, this may be a winner then. The items for future agendas. Anybody have anything that needs to be added in January?
Welcoming 2 new members and maybe a
Maybe 3.
third. So
Depending on how the city does. Will be interesting. And that puts us on public comment. Mr. Sims, I see you're here, and Ms. Wills, and I'll get you next. Oh, or is this on what you already, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Sims.
Hi, Chairman, I wanted to come in and I guess pretty much kind of tag the words that Mr. Holloman has said, that as long as I use this apparatus to highlight is accessibility. Accessibility to this building right here. And accessibility goes to access. I'm going to let y'all settle because I want y'all to hear me because I'm Baptist. We Baptist people like to talk and we like to be heard. All right, so here we go. And so what I'm saying is when it comes to access, we look at access as a way, not of just a way of suppression of resources and into the building. Lack of access is also a mechanism of voter suppression. It is very critical. It is very critical that this building has the most stringent security access than the Capitol, than the courthouse, but has the less public officials in it. The current security protocols in this building, when you come here as a citizen, not a migrant, seeking refuge from a tolerant country, but a United States citizen, this is what you have to do in order to come to this building to conduct business. You have to be wanded, come in through security. You have to log in. You have to say who you are going to see what department that person works in. Then the security officer has to call that individual, verify that individual has to come downstairs. Oh, Lord have mercy. Walk you to their office. And holy be God if they can't take care of all of your needs. And just by chance, if you say you had to pay, you had to find out how much it is to pay a parking ticket, and so you had to go see that lady, and that lady say, okay, the parking ticket is $35. So then, after she tells you that the parking ticket is $35, you can't just walk over to the cash register lady and pay the $35. You've got to come back down to the security desk. Tell the security guard, I need to go pay my $35 to the ticket place. Then the security guard calls the cash register lady. And then the cash register lady comes down to the first floor, walks you and your $35 to the cash register. And then the cash register lady has to walk you back to the security people. I'm sorry to just draw that out, but I also got to tell you, it's very pertinent for you to know that in this building, you have video cameras on all of the public access ways, so you are under surveillance. There is more video surveillance security in this building. And I almost said Deacon Grant, brother, Mr. Grant, I checked it. Than the Capitol and the courthouse. Because not only do we have visual surveillance on every floor, all entrances, we also have security guards at every entrance, and then we have a floater. What the hell is in here? And so I'm asking on the Christmas list that they justify why this mega security. Second thing on the Christmas list. Last time I was here, I was so fully emotional, I could not address, but a citizen asked the question, why we don't have a deputy city manager. The very first job that I got, and get a little emotional, was through the CETA program. Senator Bob Graham's program. My first job, Colonel Grant, was out at the C&W plant. It's so crazy how God brings things back to your memories. And what my job was is to pack state forms and ship them to various unemployment offices all around our district and our region. And this man, oh man, Mr. Willie, God bless his soul, he taught me on it is state statute that every document has to have a date of either when it was created or when it was revised. That memory came back to me like 40-something years ago. We never had a deputy city manager. That position was created. But here's the calamity that I ask, because I've done public records requests. The assistant city manager's position before former city manager Anita Favors left, one of the things that she did, she required that all assistant city managers possess a master's degree. Not a combination, possession of a master's degree. So when we created the deputy city manager's position, I asked for the position. position description, there was not one available. Because I could not understand how the current city manager could be in that position, and with me knowing he did not have a master's degree. And so then when the positions came out, they came out dumb it down. And then once the plan was in that he got this position that he used as leverage to disenfranchise other minority executives, he deleted the position. Because the top candidate that would have been viable for that position, Mr. Herring, was a black minority female named Cynthia Barber, who hired him. Hired him under the conditions, despite he misrepresented his application, his initial application, where he said he had supervisory skills, but he actually supervised documents. But Ms. Favors, the former city commissioner, wrote the exemption to allow him to be into that position. Why am I bringing this up? Because this is fraud. This is unethical. And the people of Tallahassee have had enough. That's why we want not the word transparency, but we want to experience transparency. And so if this guy who has propelled in the last 4 years, his salary has grown over $110,000. 4 years. And I dare you to check. This one individual salary has grown over $100,000 within a 4-year period. Something here is not right. It is imperative. Mr. Cecil, God bless you, my brother. You've never told me things I like, but you told me things that was correct. And I can confirm it. The Bible says that he sent his disciples by two, one to tell it and one to bear witness. I'm having a problem here bearing witness with why we have such stringent security measures and why white males are making high salaries with low education and management experience. And we're getting indictments. We're getting proposals for a liquor house to be built over on the south side. Your work here is valuable. Your work here is valuable because it is not only an educational piece, Mr. Herring, but it's a venting piece. Because this current access only allows citizens 3 minutes. And I'm sorry, that is just not adequate for the complex problems that our city is having to deal with. And so your role here is so vital to me. Not just black people, not just white people, not just rich people, not just poor people, but to every citizen of this great all-American city. And we have some outstanding city workers. And Mr. Holloman, one of them I know is just, she is the bomb. And that's my wife, over 20 years. And I better clean up, I know another one, a former retired one, my mom. And while I'm checking off the list, let me even talk about my son who has worked for the city. So I don't come down here because I have an issue with this city. I come down here and I advocate because I love this city. And I just don't apologize for being direct, because I believe that we are in a state of emergency. And you like that when you don't know who you can trust. And I'm very thankful because I have people in this community, Mr. Chairman. What do? They dress me up for you all so that my message does not get muddled, because they feel my message is important and they support it. But I can't feel any love from you. Not you, but this industry, this place. It's not reciprocal. And I'm not going to stop until someone hears my cry. And I don't need a game. I just need me. Because whether you like me or not, and just like this governor said, I'm black, I was born black, and I'm going to die black. But the words out of my mouth are universal. The blood that's running in my veins is universal. And so I'm just asking, I don't know where the pressure point is to make this guy relive that this wall has to come down. But you all need to help us as much as you possibly can. Those recommendations, Chairman, that you went down through, the people want more. She's talking about a sideline hotline. People are calling me. No, I'm sorry, baby, they don't handle that. Well, the officers say, I'm sorry, honey, they don't handle that. I get those calls too, Julie. Well, Mr. Sims, do you think they can help? No, baby, I'm sorry, they don't handle that. Why do they call me, Mr. Herring? Because they don't trust you. Not you personally, but the system has been unfair to them. And we can't ignore that. We can't ignore the mistakes that has been done and just move on like nothing happened. And that is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Members, anything else for the... Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, when our next meeting is, I'm getting there. Ms. Wills, I had a card. Is this what you already talked about? Or do you have something? Okay, thank you for this. It helps us with our minutes. Then I would tell you our next meeting is Tuesday, January 15th, here in the City Commission Chamber from 4 until close of business, or 7 p.m., whichever comes first.
And
Ms. Meadows-Keefe?
I think the communication that we just wanted to make is that the meeting schedule, pending the board chair's approval, is going to continue to be the third Tuesday of each month from 4 until close of business. We do shut down at 7. We don't meet longer than 3 hours. So Pending other board members having any comments or concerns, or the chair, it'll continue with that same
Right.
meeting date and time.
And we do occasionally adjust based on city activities that would be in conflict with our meeting. With that, no one else having anything? The meeting is adjourned.